I'm going to first give you guys a little bit of background about myself. I think it'll be important for you guys to understand a little bit more about me. I think that'll help you understand, my worldview and perhaps a little bit about where it comes from. So first, I'm a little older than most of you. Maybe some of you grad students are around my age, but for the undergrads, I'm a little older. So, when I was sitting in your shoes at Ohio State, this was my president. Of course, this is your president. So slightly different times. Next, this me. When I was coming out of high school, the big thing was getting an email address. Like it was like a big deal. You went to school and you got an email address. I had a Hotmail account. Now you guys have Twitter. And of course with Twitter, this invented almost a new language. Things like this. What does that mean? You only live once, and then there's this one. Anyone know that? Go ahead, make my day. I like that one. And then who knows this one? That is pardon me, you must have mistaken me for someone who gives a damn. I don't use that one that much, but next, when I was in college, Northwest was a direction, and now Northwest is a person. This is a baby. This is a Kanye West's baby named North. So lots has changed in the last 15, 20 years. So a little more about me. So first off, I'm a husband, so that's my wife, Danielle. We met at Stanford. She's from Illinois, from Naperville. Went to IMSA. Any IMSA? He was like, dang, she's smart. No, yeah. So she got out of Illinois as fast as she could, but is from the area. So I'm also a dad. See the little Buckeyes. He's just throwing up the H in OH. That's what that is. That's not criming. That's touchdown. Touchdown. Next, I'm a brother. Not that kind of brother, Well, that kind of brother too. But I also have two younger brothers who actually also went to Ohio State. So one thing I wanted to, for me, my life has been a bit of an interesting journey. I wasn't the type of person when I was sitting where you guys were who knew that I wanted to be a professor. In fact, when I was an undergrad, I told people specifically that I will not be a professor. So, how wrong I was about that. So, you might ask the question, well, how did you become a professor? For me, it starts with my brother. So that's my brother Caesar, who was in one of those last photos. And like every good story, it also starts with Ohio State football. So my younger brother Caesar, I call him younger because he's larger than me. So I can't call him little brother. So he was at a football camp at Ohio State. My dad suggested that I come down to the camp. This was my senior year. I knew I was going to Ohio State. Had no idea what I was going to major in, and so I decided to come down to Ohio State and meet some administrators. While I was there, I met this woman, Minnie McGee, who actually just retired from Ohio State after on the order of 40 years working at the university in their College of Engineering. She told me about a program they have called Preface. This Preface program was a way of integrating incoming freshmen with the engineering curriculum. As you guys know, how many engineers we have in the room? So that freshman year can be pretty painful. And so this program was designed to help you get acclimated a little more quickly. I love the program. She accepted me into the program. Actually, I came down to Ohio State on a Friday, met with her in her office, and she offered me a position in this program that started on Sunday. So I drove back home from Columbus to Cleveland. It's about 2 hours, quit my summer job, told all my friends goodbye, came right back to Ohio State, enrolled in this pre-engineering program, and that's how I became an engineer. At the time, I didn't even know what engineering was at the age of 18. So this is important for my path. While there, I got involved in NSBE, that's the National Society of Black Engineers. So NSBE was, been critical for my career, but one of the things that happened there is I met an African-American professor named Gregory Washington. There's Dr. Washington. He's actually no longer at Ohio State. He's currently Dean of Engineering at UC Irvine. But back then he was at Ohio State, and he said he came to a NSBE meeting, and he basically, from the time I think his sophomore year at NC State through finishing his PhD, he never got a B. He basically had A's, for a long time, many moons. And so he was giving us a program on academic excellence and how to do well in school. And at the end of it, he said, if you're in this room and you're a mechanical engineer, and I was planning to be a mechanical engineer, you need to get to know me. And I don't know how many people took him up on that, but I absolutely did. So I started going by his office. He learned that I was looking for a job after a few months, and as a sophomore, he brought me into his lab to start doing research. How many undergraduates here? How many of you have been involved in research on some level? So when I was, that's great. When I was an undergrad, this was a brand new thing. Like undergrads doing research was it wasn't like now there are programs all over the nation for people to do research. But he had the vision to say, you should consider doing some research. Because of that, I actually wound up really liking research. Ultimately got a fellowship from the National Science Foundation to attend Stanford. So that's a picture of Stanford campus. Stanford's where I met Juan Santiago, who is an alum of aerospace engineering, PhD, here at University of Illinois. So you could say my academic grandparents are here at Illinois. While working with him, I basically had two ideas. I thought, well, I want to work in something, this was 2003, I either want to do something in micro-scale engineering, or I wanted to do something in energy. Not sure which one. I thought I would have to pick. Turned out, the summer before coming there, he got some funding from Honda. So this is a picture of a Honda fuel cell. Honda was interested in trying to figure out ways of managing liquid water in fuel cells. I'll talk a little bit more about this later. But Juan's idea was to integrate these microfluidic pumps that have no moving parts. So I was the student that got to integrate this micro-scale engineering with this alternative energy system. So when I accepted the admittance to Stanford, I had no idea, this project didn't even exist. But by the time I got there, it was there. That led to me getting a PhD, then ultimately becoming a professor at MIT. So I bring all this up to say, a lot of people ask, well, how do you become a professor at MIT? And clearly, I have no idea. But one thing I can say, I tried to highlight the people. People are important in your journey. I don't care what your faith view is. People are important in your journey. So the people that you're meeting at University of Illinois, lots of great people here. So, don't take them for granted. They can have a huge effect on where you will be. When this guy went to a football program at Ohio State in 1999, I had no idea that 11 years later, I'd be a professor at MIT in engineering. If you would have told me that, I would have said, you're crazy. Yeah, I said, you have crazy faith. You'd have said that. But it was true. So why did I become a professor? That's how I became a professor. It might also be interesting in why. First is freedom. So this is a picture from Amistad. Let us free. Freedom. As an academic, you basically you have carte blanche to study anything that you can get funding and students to work on. Actually, you don't even need the students. If you can get funding, the students are great if you can get them. But if you can get funding, you can work on it. And as an academic, I have a lot of days that are exciting, challenging, never boring. Do we have any faculty in the room? Yeah, so a few, I'm sure many of you can attest to the fact that your life is a lot of things. Boring is not one of them. And a lot of that is because you can shape your career and what you work on. Next, intellectual engagement, and that's related to this. I just love having my mind engaged in my work. I did a lot of internships as an undergraduate, and with very good companies, but they just didn't challenge me, not the way research did. I liked not knowing the answer. I liked, starting a problem, and it was unclear where it was going to wind up. I liked being the first, doing an experiment, and knowing I'm the first person in the world who's seen this. That kind of excited me a little bit. And last is, related to that is lifestyle. So, here you see this comic. People are saying, basically keep working. And we find it helps motivate our less motivated employees. I found in typical jobs, or most jobs that I had access to as an undergraduate, 2 o'clock comes around after lunch. Some of you have probably had internships like this, and you're just staring at the clock like, please make it stop. I hated that. That doesn't happen for me now. Usually I look up, and it's 6 or 7 o'clock, it's like, oh, I got to go home. Like, the day has just flown by. And last thing is money. Professors make decent money, maybe not, maybe a little smaller. Yeah, we make okay money. We're not doing too bad. So one more slide as a bit of background, what I study. So this is my chance to talk a little bit about some research. We're in Illinois. You guys are interested in science and engineering. So showing 2 projects here. One of them, anybody know Professor Paul Kennis, whose office is like right outside? No? Well, either way, he was one person does. Okay. Yay! So at Harvard, his postdoc advisor, George Whitesides, and along with him and some others, they showed that you could have electrochemical systems that don't require a membrane. A typical electrochemical system has an ion exchange membrane to keep your reactants on the anode and cathode, or your fuel and oxidant, separate. So if you're thinking about a fuel cell that many of you might be familiar with that runs on hydrogen and air, there's typically a membrane in between them that keeps the hydrogen and air from interacting with each other and reacting in a parasitic side reaction that would lower your efficiency. The problem is that membrane is the single most expensive component in the system. So they showed that it was possible using the physics of laminar flow, so flows, non-turbulent flows, low-speed flows, that you could eliminate the membrane. One challenge, though, is that these systems, they had no membrane, and so they were potentially very cost-effective, but they didn't produce a lot of power. So we've devised a way using hydrogen and bromine chemistry to get a lot of power. So this is actually old data. Right now, we get around 1 watt per centimeter squared out of this system. This is about a factor of 2 higher than state-of-the-art hydrogen air fuel cells at room temperature. Something else we've done, and I will show this movie, so I'm going to back up, hit forward, and I want you to concentrate on what's happening here. So this droplet of water hits this porous surface, and then there are other droplets seemingly emanating from this. It almost looks like it's carbonated, right? So anyone ever had a carbonated beverage? Don't lie. Don't lie to me. Okay, that's probably most of you. Some of you are going to have a beer right after this. Some of you have probably had a beer before this. So, carbonated beverage, CO2 rises to the surface due to buoyancy. Bubbles burst, the CO2 bubbles burst. When it does, there's an excess, the surface energy has to go somewhere. It goes into kinetic energy in the form of a jet that emanates from the center of where the droplet was. That jet then breaks up into smaller droplets. So if you have a sink, right, if I were to turn on the water in this sink, if I turn it on slow enough, you see at the bottom, it's breaking up into droplets due to this Rayleigh instability. That same thing is happening here. And so the droplets that you see with your eye are the result of jets that came from bubbles on the surface, right? So these are jets that are shooting off and then they break up into droplets. And so one thing we've shown that this actually happens when water hits soil at conditions consistent with rainfall. So think of an Illinois summer. Illinois summer, very hot. Imagine a hot day and you get one of those kind of quick rains, right? If you go outside after a quick rain on a summer day, don't you smell something? Right, that smell has a name that's called petrichor. It essentially is, the name means essence of the earth, effectively. And it had been shown that this smell comes from excretions from bacteria and plants in dry weather. It was unclear how it got into the air. We think this mechanism is how it gets into the air. So if anyone's interested in that, we can talk about that later. But I just want to show a little bit about what I work on, just to give you some context of who I am as a person and a professor. But now I'd like to talk about my subject, and I titled this, What is Your Faith In? So let me get my notes up. What is your faith in? Now, I think it's important to ask this question, what is faith? Now, is it possible, some of you might have come here with this question, is it possible to be a believer in a faith system like Christianity and be a professor at a place like MIT? Does that make any sense, or am I just nuts? And so that's basically the topic of our discussion today. Isn't it incongruent? It seems like, faith asks you to believe things with no evidence, and scientists are always seeking after evidence. How can someone be a scientist and a person of faith? It seems like oil and water. My thesis is that they are not incongruent. In fact, they are intricately linked. In fact, many people who are at the frontier of science actually exercise faith. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. First, I'm going to give a definition of faith because I think it's important for us to be on the same page. I think if we ask all of you what is faith, there are probably 80 of you in here. We'd probably get 81 different answers. So let's first get on the same page so you understand when I say faith, what do I mean? Then I'll give some examples of faith in science. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a subject that perhaps you haven't explored, even if you've thought about faith, which is testing your faith. Testing your faith. So we're going to establish what is faith, faith at the frontiers of science, and then how you might go about testing your faith. So as I said, first thing, we need to get on the same page, so we have to have a working definition. So what do? You're confronted with a new topic. One of your humanities classes, they've given you a new topic to write about. What's the first thing you do to understand that topic? Google, right? So let's go to Google. Now, some of you probably came here, you Googled me, and so if you Google me, this is the type of stuff you see. Surprised my Harlem Shake video isn't higher on this list. So anyway, you go to Google, and thankfully, just like Honey Boo Boo, right, and twerking, we go to Wikipedia to learn about faith. Right, so faith actually has a Wikipedia page. And so looking at this page, according to Wikipedia, what does Wikipedia say? Wikipedia says faith is confidence or trust in a person or thing or a deity or in the doctrines or teachings of a religion. It may also be belief that is not based on proof. Now you'll notice here that faith is firstly a trust in a person or thing. Now you may not think that you have faith if you don't believe in God, but in fact all of us exercise faith all the time. From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed. So go to a blank slide. Now, let me give one example of this. One example of this is being a parent. Do we have any parents in the room? A couple of parents in the room. So I'm a parent of, I showed that picture earlier. I'm a parent of 2 young boys. And one of the things that happens when you become a parent is you get all these theories and things from parents, from your friends, from your grandparents about how to raise kids. Everyone has a theory on how to raise kids. I asked if we polled all 80 of you, how do you raise kids? There would probably be 85 theories on how to raise kids properly. You would disagree with yourself in some instances. A lot of that has to do with faith, in the sense that you still have to do something, right? So your kids are there. You don't know exactly what's the best way to raise them, but you have to do something. And you do something, you step out largely on faith. So let me give an example. So I was speaking to a friend of mine one day, and he told me an interesting story. He says, oh, my son, he's in the greatest school. We just love his school. And so I'm intrigued. I have kids. I'm interested. Well, what's so great about this school? He says, it really brings out their creativity. So, okay, creative kids, that would be good, as long as they're not too creative, but at least a little creativity is good. So what do? He says, well, one of the things they do is they have this rule that at home the kids are not allowed to play with single-use toys. So toys that only have one use, they're not allowed to play. So, for example, rather than giving them something like this, a remote-controlled car, right? A remote-controlled car, you can only do one thing with it. You ride it, you control the buttons. He might give his son a stick, right? Because with this stick, you can throw it at squirrels. You can poke your sister in the eye. You can play the air drums. There's so many things that you can do with this stick. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. It's certainly cheaper. But I'm not sure if it would necessarily make for better children. And then I thought about it, all the things that this kid would be missing out on because he can't play with single-use toys. Like I could imagine Christmas at his house, and he goes downstairs and he runs down and he rips open the wrapping paper, and it's a blank sheet of paper. And a blank sheet of paper, he can write a story, or he can draw something, or he can eat it. So many things he can do with this blank sheet of paper. Who needs an Xbox, right? Use your creativity. But then I thought about, there's so many things that you'd never be able to do if you couldn't use single-use toys. Like you couldn't ride a bike, right? Because there's only one use for a bike, which is masking how slow of a runner you are. Right? Could never use a bike. Next, what about video games? So he's a young boy. A lot of boys play video games. What about this? He could be Derrick Rose in NBA 2K15. Matter of fact, this is probably the only way you'll see Derrick Rose playing basketball is in video games. Sorry about that. I just had to put that in there. Or he could be a sniper in Call of Duty, or a young thugpreneur in Grand Theft Auto. This one controller opens a whole world of possibilities that he will never be able to experience. And I just thought, that would be a sad life. What about a swimming pool, right? What do you do in a swimming pool? A swimming pool is for swimming. Can he not go to the swimming pool? Like is a restriction so strict that he can't do that too? But then I thought about it, and actually, boys, the swimming pool is multi-use. So maybe he actually can use a swimming pool. So now, there's no way that my friend absolutely knows that this is the best way to raise his kids, right? There's no way there's enough data on this method across enough different types of kids and enough different situations to know this is the best way to raise their kids. He's acting on faith, right? He has some evidence, right? He probably went to the school. They probably talked to parents. Maybe they got to talk to some alumni if the school isn't that new. But he doesn't know for sure that this is the best way to raise his kids. But he's got to do something, right? He's acting on faith, right? He's acting on faith. So the question is, what is faith? So I'm going to give my working definition of faith. Faith is belief in a person or thing with incomplete evidence. Right? Faith is belief in a person or thing with incomplete evidence. Some of the most important decisions you'll ever make in life, like parenting, like who you marry, you'll make with incomplete evidence. Now, in fact, people exercising enormous amount of faith have made some of the biggest advances in science and technology. So now I'd like to talk about how faith interacts with science and maybe a little bit about what I do. So I'm a professor at a university, much like University of Illinois, and my job entails two different things. So there's the teaching aspect, which be in a room like this with undergraduates and or grad students like yourself, and in teaching, you are typically showing what is known, right? There's a textbook, it's known information, there's often very little debate, particularly for undergraduate subjects on, what is the truth. Everyone kind of knows, so not much faith involved there. First of all, thermodynamics, most people who are sane agree, right, in what it is. So that's the teaching aspect, but then there's the research aspect, right? In the research aspect of my work, we are taking problems and we're trying to advance things to the unknown. If we know the answer to a research problem, that's actually not research at all, right? Research is going beyond what is known to discover what is unknown. And oftentimes that is done on faith. So I'll give you a few examples of this. The first one comes from my own PhD. Not trying to call myself a great scientist, but I'm just familiar with this story because I lived it for many, many moons. So when I entered graduate school, I was tasked with, as I mentioned earlier, there was this Honda project that was used. They wanted to integrate these microfluidic pumps that had no moving parts with a proton exchange membrane fuel cell. Now, there's an issue with fuel cells. So these particular fuel cells, the way they work, they take hydrogen and air, so they take fuel and oxidant, and they put them into the system, and you get useful energy, waste heat, and water. Right? So useful energy, waste heat, and water come out. So a fuel cell, you can actually think of it, it's almost like a hybrid between an internal combustion engine and a solid-state battery like in your cell phone. So like a battery, it takes the chemical energy in your reactants, in this case hydrogen and air, and converts them directly to electricity or electrical energy. That's why they have the potential for higher efficiency than a combustion engine. It goes directly from chemical bonds to electrical energy, something we can readily use, right? But it's also like an engine in the sense that you have to continuously supply the fuel. A fuel cell doesn't store power. Your battery stores power, right? You charge it in, it stores power. Your car doesn't store power. You have to continuously fill it up with gas in order for it to run. That's similar to a fuel cell. A fuel cell, you continuously add the fuel and the oxidant in order for the reactions to proceed. But as I said, those reactions happen electrochemically, and so it's like a hybrid between a fuel, between a battery and a combustion engine. Now the issue though, as I said, they make useful energy, waste heat, and water. That water is required for the fuel cell to run properly, but if you produce too much water, the system can flood. When the system floods, this prevents your reactants from actually making it to the catalyst layer. So flooding is bad. Everyone say flooding is bad. Flooding is bad. All right, there we go. So wake everybody up. Flooding is bad, right? So what we were doing, we wanted to integrate these pumps that have no moving parts. So my advisor, who was from University of Illinois, had this idea to integrate these pumps with no moving parts so that we could remove this liquid water and so the fuel cells could breathe easy and work properly. There's one challenge. These pumps were very brittle. They cracked very easily, and they were very difficult to integrate with the fuel cell. So before I even got started, there were two postdocs, so not PhDs, two PhD students, two postdocs who had worked on this for several months and were unsuccessful. So two postdocs, much more experienced than me, much more experienced in fuel cells, worked on it for several months, said they were unsuccessful. In fact, one of them, when I got started, told me this will never work. not the things you want to hear when you're starting your PhD. I would give little faith. So I decided to go after this anyway, right? Now, what is it that might keep me going after this problem after two people told me it wouldn't work? That thing, I would argue, is faith. Now, after many late nights, several all-nighters, and about a year of work, we were actually able to get this thing to work. So let me show you a little bit about this, this system. So here's a movie at the top of one of these pumps. It's called an electroosmotic pump. So the way this pump works, it's got glass pores. So glass actually acts like an acid when you put it in contact with liquid water. And by act like an acid, I mean it donates a proton. And so the glass comes negatively charged. So you have a negative charged surface. If you apply an electric potential, there are charges that are very close to that negatively charged surface, positive ions. They kind of like being close to the wall. If you apply an electric field, those charges can move. If those pores are small, when those charges move, they drag the liquid with them. Think of it like a conveyor belt. So you have these conveyor belts along the wall of these channels, and they're dragging the fluid with them, but this is all with no moving parts, right? So here you see this pumping. Actually, the pumping stopped. This pumping is cycling back and forth. We're simply turning the electric field, changing the polarity, and you see this water moving in and out. So we're doing this all with electric fields. We integrated it with a fuel cell like this, and in fact, this fuel cell was significantly better. This fuel cell could run at a wide range of operating conditions, and you never had to worry about flooding. Now, along the way, there are several times I wanted to quit. I wanted to change projects. I wanted to do something different. I didn't think it was going to work, but I kept going anyway. What is that thing that kept me going? Right? That thing was faith that this idea could actually work. Right? Any PhD students in the room know you have to have faith that you're going to graduate one day, or you ever lose that faith that you're going to graduate, it becomes rough to be a PhD student, because it can be years. You're in your second year. It's years before it's coming, but you have to still keep working, knowing that it's coming down the line. So I'd like to talk about another example. So that's a personal example, but I'll talk about this man. Who knows who this is? Yeah, it's Thomas Edison. So one of the great inventors, not just in the United States, but in the history of the world, one of the great inventors. So I'd like to talk about his journey with the light bulb. So the story of Edison and the light bulb actually begins before Edison, largely because many people had tried to develop incandescent light bulbs unsuccessfully. So others had made bulbs, but there were several issues with those bulbs. They consumed too much power, they were too expensive, they had limited lifetime. But Edison was sure that he could do it. He just felt that he was more industrious than others, and he felt that he could do it. In fact, he made a proclamation 2 years before it ever happened that gaslighting is over, I will solve this problem. So he put out ads in the newspaper saying that it was done. Like, could you imagine you're a PhD student, the first year of your PhD, you say, I'm going to graduate, and you put it in the Illini newspaper. Like, that's effectively what Edison did. Now, unfortunately, 2 years later, he still didn't have a working light bulb. And, as you would imagine, the haters started to hate. And so people came out, they chastised him publicly, they called him a fraud, a quack, a pseudoscientist. But he didn't let that deter him, he kept working on this. Now, one of the key components that they needed before they could get a working bulb is they needed the right filament material to give a glow discharge without incinerating. So over several months, he and his team tested over 6,000 different filament materials. 6,000, right? If they had stopped at 5,999, we may not be talking about Edison in the same way that we do today. They tested over 6,000 different materials until they came up with the right carbon-based material. In 1881, at the Paris exhibition, he exhibited his light, and it was a huge success. Now, he proved his critics wrong, but you have to imagine along the way, 2 years of working on this thing, thousands and thousands and thousands of experiments. What would keep him going? What's going to keep you going when all the evidence is actually suggesting that this is not going to work? When you've tried thousands of materials and it's not working, you have more evidence that it's not going to work than that it is. But they kept going. I would argue that the thing that kept them going, the thing that keeps a lot of scientists going, is faith. Let me give one more example. So a modern day example of this is the recent discovery of the Higgs boson. So this particle was postulated by several scientists. It's given Higgs his name, but it was postulated by several scientists a few decades ago. But it had eluded particle physicists for nearly 5 decades. So there was theory suggesting that this particle might exist, but there was no hard evidence. No one had actually seen it or seen hard evidence of it. Now, but they believed that they had the right equipment, they could get it done. So what is that right equipment? This is the CERN Large Hadron Collider. So they needed this roughly $10 billion project before they felt they had the right experimental tool to actually discover this particle. Now recently, it's believed to have been detected by 2 different groups, answering many important questions in particle physics while also eliciting many more questions. So it begs the question, why would a community of scientists spend billions and billions and billions of dollars over 5 decades pursuing a particle that they only had weak theoretical evidence for? They had theoretical evidence, but who's to know that the theory was correct until they'd actually seen it? I would argue the thing that kept all those people going, the thing that led to the building of this large experimental apparatus, is faith that they were going to find something. That thing was faith. So some of you are still looking skeptical. You still don't believe me. So perhaps you will believe the Lord Voldemort. So towards the end of the last Harry Potter movie, when the chosen one, Harry Potter, everyone thinks he's dead. Now, I'm not going to get into the fact that, here you have this movie about a chosen one who dies for his friends, but then comes back and saves everything. I'm not going to get into the allegory around that. But Voldemort tells Ginny Weasley, Harry's little sister, let me give my Voldemort voice, Harry Potter is dead! From this day forth, you put your faith in me. Now, notice that he doesn't question the existence of faith, just where you put it. He doesn't question the existence of faith, just where you put it. So if the Dark Lord knows we have faith, it must be true. I don't know what more evidence I can give you. So now why do I bring up all these stories? Now some would have you to believe, as I mentioned earlier, that faith and science don't mix. They actually mix very well. In fact, I would argue that faith is necessary for advancing science. Faith is necessary for advancing science. Now, there are many people who have applied faith, not just to their science, but also had faith in God, who were tremendous scientists. Examples include Max Planck, who was one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, George Lemaitre, who pioneered the Big Bang Theory, Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project. There's scores and scores of top-notch, Nobel Prize-winning scientists who had faith not just in their science, but in God. Now, if you were ever come to MIT, not in the winter, but if you were ever to come to MIT after the snow melts, I could show you a whole host of professors that have their faith not just in their science, but also in Jesus Christ. So now many people wrongly assume that what the Bible teaches you is to exercise blind faith, or faith with no evidence whatsoever. This simply isn't true. So as an example, in the book of Acts, when talking to a non-Christian leader about his faith, the Apostle Paul says this: "What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it was not done in a corner." So here Paul is being tried for words that he's been saying about the life, death, and ultimate resurrection of Jesus Christ. Right? And he's saying this just a few years after it's happened. And when he's talking to this man, he doesn't say, well, you just have to trust me. He says, no, this was not done in a corner. There is evidence for this. Look at the evidence. There was CNN, Christian News Network. Right? There's evidence for this. Don't just take my word for it. You know about these things. You've heard about these things. There's raw evidence for it. Consider the evidence when you're considering my points. Right? Paul is appealing here not to his heart. He's appealing to reason. He's appealing to the fact that there's evidence for this, and you can believe it. So now the faith that I'm talking about, this faith, if you're looking for a practical example in your own life, this is very similar to the faith that you might have in people. So as an example, I'm married, right? The faith that I have in my wife, I can't tell you for sure that my wife is trustworthy. But the evidence that I have over years of being together suggests that I can trust her and trust her with my life, and I want to spend my life with her. If I waited until I had all the evidence necessary to determine if she was trustworthy, you would never get married. None of you would be here. if relationships only happened when people had every last bit of information about the person that they were going to be with. So faith is necessary for not just life, it's necessary for all of our close relationships. A relationship with God is no different than a relationship in many ways with anyone else in this room. Right? You have to step out on faith. Right? When you meet a new person, you don't know if that person is nice. You don't know if that person is going to tweet about you. You don't know what that person is going to do. Right? But you have to step out in faith. So we don't live in this world where there's this group of people that employs faith. These faith people, these Christians or Jews or Muslims or people of various faith backgrounds. It's not like there's faith people and not faith people. Everyone is employing faith all the time, all throughout the day, all throughout your life. The real question is not if you have faith. The real question is, where's your faith? Right? As Voldemort said, put your faith in me. He's telling you, you have faith, put it in me. I'm asking you, I know you have faith. You have faith in something. The real question is, where is that faith? So faith is not just this religious thing that's just for some small group of people. It's really for everyone. Now, whether you've thought about it or not, you have faith in a great many things. Right? Some of you came having faith that there would be food after this program. Right? You're a little hungry right now, and I can tell you there are cookies, assuming there's no one who's gone out there and sold them. Right? You have faith in the University of Illinois. Right? You have faith that going through this program, the rigor of your degree, will lead to something afterwards. So you place your faith and your money and a lot of your time in the University of Illinois. Maybe you have faith in the government. You have faith in the government of the United States to protect you and to provide safety and opportunity and shelter. You have faith in a great many things. Now, if you're curious about where your faith or where your deepest faith is, I can give you a hint. Look for the things you hope for, and look for your fears. Look for the things you hope for, and look for your fears. Are you hoping to get a job after graduation? Perhaps your faith is in finances and in money for your security. Are you fearful of being alone? Perhaps your faith is in human relationships. Look for your hopes and your fears. They will point you to where your faith is. Now, my last point, I suggest you identify where you put your faith in your life. And once you've identified it, you need to examine it and you need to test it. And I believe you can test your faith much like you could test a scientific hypothesis. Now, one of the great things about this is that in the case of your faith, life provides all of the tests that you will ever need to determine if your faith is in the right place. Now, if you ask me, where's my faith? My faith is in Jesus Christ. But my faith hasn't always been there. I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't grow up as a Christian. I actually became a Christian as a freshman in college through a roommate. This roommate that I met, I was intrigued by his life and started attending church with him. And his life really challenged my worldview, the things that I was resting my life on. And so I changed my worldview and became someone who had faith in Christ. But that faith has definitely been tested. Now, for me, that test came on a specific day, and specific day and a specific time. It was June 10th, 2010. It was a Thursday. Now, I was in California for a business trip. I had just started my job at MIT as a professor. I was about 6 months in, and I was pretty excited. I went to Stanford for graduate school. I was excited to meet, some of my old friends from grad school, see my advisor, see some of my old friends. At around 2 p.m., I got a call from my brother-in-law. Now, that's not an odd thing, except for the fact that, we were on reasonable terms, but he just didn't call me very often. So I was curious when I see, his number pop up. And it turns out that this was a very special call. He was calling me to tell me that my sister, shown here, so this is me about 5 years ago. This is me and my sister, and this is my sister a little later in life, that my sister, 35 years old, married, 2 children, was dead. He's calling me to tell me that my sister was dead. I never got a call, your sister's sick. She went into the hospital that day. She was gone by the afternoon. They didn't even know what happened by the time she died. She died of something called infective endocarditis, which is where if you have a defect in your heart, it can lead to an infection by certain bacteria. Those bacteria clot with platelets and form dangerous vegetations that can lead to sepsis. Even in the United States, if you get sepsis roughly 50% of people with sepsis die, even in the United States. That's the same mortality rate as Ebola. This is what my sister had. Now, it's really easy to say you have faith in something. It's easy to say you have faith in science, or faith in Jesus, or faith in wherever your faith is when things are going well, right? When you're getting a job offer, when you're making money, and you've got nice relationships. What does your faith do when you have to call your parents and tell them that their firstborn daughter is dead? Because that's what I had to do. Right? Those next months were some of the toughest in my life. My wife was pregnant, and it was really tough for me to reconcile the fact that my kids were never going to meet my sister. They were never going to meet their aunt. Now, I had a lot of questions along the way. A lot of questions, and I imagine some of you have been through situations like this, and you've had some of those same questions. Questions like, why did this happen? Was this punishment for something that I'd done? Will this pain ever go away? Now, I have to confess, I had a lot of why questions and lots of tear-filled nights. And most of those why questions were actually never answered. Why it happened, I never got answers to why. But through my faith in Christ, I got something better. Through my faith in Christ, I know why not. I know it's not because God doesn't love me. Because God sent his son, right? This week, it's Easter. Some of you may be familiar with Easter, but what is Easter celebrating? Easter is celebrating God sending his son to die for us so that we wouldn't have to die. We have a God that loves justice and loves us. The only way he could reconcile his justice with his love of us was to punish himself. The only way he could reconcile his justice was to punish himself. He would rather his son die than we die. We have a God who suffered on the cross and was resurrected. Through that suffering, I know he wouldn't suffer if he wasn't interested in my life. Why would he die for me if he didn't love me? So I may not know why my sister died, but I know it's not because I don't have a God who loves me. Because he suffered with me. It's precisely through that suffering that I know in my suffering I'm loved. And you all know, if you look in your heart, you all know this. Think about the closest people in your life. Brothers, sisters, parents, friends. Can you name anyone you love who you've never suffered with? If your love is deep, you've suffered together. If your love is deep. That's how I know I have a God who loves me. It's because of Easter, just a couple days ago. It's a reminder every year that my sister, she suffered, but she didn't suffer alone. So what did I learn through this situation? I learned that my greatest challenge to date in life was dealing with this loss of my sister. And my faith in Christ actually provided resources to deal with this. My worldview, my faith was congruent with the actual world that we live in. So if faith in Christ can handle the toughest problems, like burying your sister, perhaps it can also handle some of the smaller problems, like what internship will I take this summer? Right? God cares about all of you. Not just all of you individually, but everything about you. Right? And that's what I learned through this situation. My faith was tested, and I came out of it knowing that my faith can handle all of life's circumstances. So to close, my question to you is this. Your faith is somewhere. Whatever it is, you need to test it. I suggest you test it and find out if it can really handle all of life's circumstances that get thrown at you. Thank you.